She was lost at sea. The billionaire saved her life and changed his forever. Part 3. Chapter 13, Building a New Life. The apartment was small, but warm. A second-floor walk-up in a quiet Brooklyn neighborhood, with just enough space for a nursery, a modest kitchen, and the soft glow of early morning light that spilled through the living room window. It wasn't glamorous, but Claire Wallace didn't care. It was safe. And most importantly, it was hers, the little world she had carved out alone for herself and her son, Luke. From the moment she held him for the first time in the hospital, every priority she'd ever known had rearranged itself. Late-night meetings, client dinners, ad campaigns and deadlines, all faded into the background. Her world became about one thing, him. Raising Luke alone wasn't easy. Claire didn't have a partner. She didn't have Victor's wealth, his staff, or his last name. She didn't have the option to disappear from the world and figure things out. What she did have was a sharp mind, a relentless work ethic, and the quiet resolve of a woman who had made her choice and refused to regret it. She returned to work when Luke was 3 months old. Not full-time, she couldn't bear the idea of missing everything, but enough to keep her job and stay afloat. She worked remotely, logging in during naps, catching up after midnight, balancing her laptop with one arm while holding a bottle in the other. There were nights she didn't sleep. Days when she went from presentation decks to diaper changes without ever sitting down. She cooked while bouncing Luke on her hip. Took Zoom calls while he napped on her chest. Built campaigns from scratch while the baby monitor hummed beside her. It wasn't glamorous. It was survival. But even on the hardest days, she never once wished for a different life. Because Luke was joy, pure, untamed joy. He had a smile that could melt steel, the same grey eyes as his father, and a quiet curiosity that made her laugh even when she hadn't had coffee or sleep in 2 days. He babbled early, walked before his first birthday, and loved books with pictures of oceans and boats. Claire read to him every night. Good Night Moon, the going-to-bed book, Are You My Mother? She gave him all the affection she could never explain. And when he reached up and touched her face with his chubby little hand, it filled something in her that she hadn't known was still broken. There were sacrifices. She turned down promotions. Missed parties. Let friendships drift away. Sometimes, while folding laundry at midnight or rinsing bottles in silence, she thought of Victor. Not as a man, not as the billionaire who had once rescued her from the sea, but as the missing piece in Luke's life. She wondered if he would have been a good father. And then she reminded herself, it didn't matter. Victor didn't know. And she had made that decision. She would carry the weight of it, every day, for the rest of her life if she had to. Luke didn't need a castle or a private jet. He needed her. So Claire built him a life from the ground up. Each month, she carefully set money aside for his future, little by little. She took on extra freelance clients, learned to cook organic meals on a tight budget, and chose second-hand toys and books with care. She found a gentle nanny, Rosa, to watch him part-time when her workload grew. Every inch of their life was filled with intention and love. And as the seasons passed and Luke grew into a vibrant, happy 2-year-old, Claire began to believe, quietly, cautiously, that maybe she could do this. That maybe, just maybe, she could give him enough all on her own. She would always live with the choice she made. But she would never regret the child it gave her. Chapter 14, 2 years later. By the time he turned 2, Luke Wallace was the kind of child who lit up every room he entered. He had a soft, musical laugh that tumbled from his chest like sunshine. He loved puzzles, bananas, and picture books with animals that roared. He had learned the alphabet early, could count to 20, though he often skipped 14, and insisted on wearing mismatched socks. His words came in fast, joyful bursts. Mama, come play, that cloud looks like a whale, read again, please. Claire's life had grown around him like ivy on stone. She'd learned the rhythm of his days, how he woke up humming in his crib, how he needed exactly 2 stories before bed, how he always offered her the last bite of his toast. He made the ordinary magical. Even on days when money was tight or sleep was rare, one smile from him made the rest of the world disappear. He was her reason, her joy, her everything. Which is why she noticed when something changed. It began with small things, easily dismissed. He was more tired than usual after daycare. He asked to be carried instead of running ahead like he always did. Then came a low-grade fever that lingered for days. She kept him hydrated, gave him children's Tylenol, and watched closely, chalking it up to a seasonal virus. But it didn't go away. Then came the bruises. Small ones at first, on his shins, near his knees. Claire assumed he'd fallen while climbing. But more appeared, strange and too dark for such gentle bumps. She started to take photos, documenting each one as her unease grew. Luke stopped eating as much. His naps stretched longer. He seemed paler. One evening, after dinner, she watched him slowly lower himself from the couch and sit cross-legged on the floor. He looked up at her with a dazed expression and said, "Mama, my legs feel heavy." She crouched in front of him. "Do they hurt?" He nodded. "Tired hurt?" Her heart dropped. She gathered him in her arms, pressing a kiss to his forehead. "Okay, sweetheart. Let's get you to bed." That night, Claire didn't sleep. By morning, she had an appointment with their pediatrician. Dr. Lee, calm and methodical, did a full checkup while Claire sat nervously in the corner. Luke was quiet through the exam, no squirming, no whining, just quiet, which was the most alarming part of all. After checking his heart and listening to his lungs, Dr. Lee frowned slightly. "How long has the fatigue been going on?" he asked gently. "A week," Claire said. "Maybe longer, but it's gotten worse." Dr. Lee asked more questions. Claire answered every one. Then came the blood draw. Claire held Luke on her lap while the nurse worked, humming softly in his ear as he whimpered into her shirt. She didn't let go until the band-aid was in place and the nurse stepped out. "I don't want to worry you," Dr. Lee said afterward, "but I want to run a full panel. I'm seeing a few signs that warrant more investigation: pale skin, bruising, fatigue." Claire's voice barely rose above a whisper. "What do you think it is?" "It's too early to say. It could be a vitamin deficiency. It could be something more. Let's not jump to conclusions. We'll get the results as quickly as possible." "How long?" "About 30 days," he said. "Some of the more advanced diagnostics take time." Claire nodded slowly, but her mind was already racing. Back home, Claire tucked Luke into bed, then sat on the floor beside his crib with her back against the wall. She stayed there for hours, staring into the dark, listening to the quiet sound of his breathing. Her thoughts spiraled. She'd done everything right. She'd fed him healthy food, kept him on schedule, protected him from the world. She'd read every book, followed every milestone chart, gone to every checkup. And yet, here they were. Waiting. The worst part wasn't the uncertainty. It was the silence. The 30-day vacuum in which every fear could grow teeth. She knew the logical thing was to wait for answers. But the emotional truth. She was terrified. Terrified that something inside her little boy was breaking. Terrified that she might not be able to fix it. Chapter 15, Silent Worry. The days passed like slow-moving shadows. After the appointment, after the blood was drawn and the paperwork filed, Claire left the clinic holding Luke's hand a little tighter than usual. He was quiet, drowsy from the morning's tests, his little fingers limp in hers as they walked back to the car. The nurse had smiled kindly. The doctor had reassured her. The staff had used all the right words. Let's wait and see, these tests take time, no reason to panic yet. But the words didn't touch her. They fell around her like snow, melting before they ever sank in. Claire knew how to read people. It was a skill sharpened by years in marketing, by every investor pitch and client meeting and campaign launch. She could tell when someone was hiding something behind professional language. And she had seen it. In Dr. Lee's eyes. In the way his brow had furrowed just a little too long as he studied Luke's chart. In the soft voice he used when he said they'd be thorough, the kind of tone people used when they were afraid to say more. 30 days. That's how long it would take to get the full results. 30 days of not knowing. 30 days of guessing. Googling symptoms at 3 a.m., convincing herself she was overreacting, and then falling apart the next minute when Luke refused dinner or asked to nap after lunch. She didn't tell anyone. Not her mother, who would worry too loudly. Not her best friend Mia, who would drop everything and come rushing over, when Claire didn't want anyone to see her this raw. Not even Rosa, the nanny, who had worked for them part-time since Luke was 6 months old and loved him like her own. Claire smiled during daycare pickups. Nodded along in virtual meetings. Sent polite emails to clients and responded to project briefs with her usual efficiency. But beneath the polished surface, she was coming undone. She started sleeping with her phone next to her pillow again. Set reminders for every dose of vitamins, checked Luke's temperature 3 times a day even when he seemed fine. She cleaned obsessively, changing sheets, wiping down toys, sanitizing doorknobs. As if by sheer will she could scrub away whatever was coming for them. And she watched him. Every moment. When he played with blocks and suddenly sat down, rubbing his legs. When he stared at his dinner plate with disinterest. When she noticed faint circles under his eyes. "Mama," he said one evening, curling into her side on the couch, "my tummy feels tired." Her smile never wavered. "Let's rest, sweetheart." But inside, her chest cracked wide open. One night, after Luke had gone to bed, Claire sat at the kitchen table in silence. The apartment was dark except for the soft glow of the hallway nightlight. A half-empty cup of chamomile tea sat forgotten at her elbow. Her laptop was open, but the screen was frozen on a single sentence. Early signs of aplastic anemia in children can include fatigue, bruising, and recurring fevers. She shut the screen quickly, stood, and gripped the edge of the sink. She couldn't lose him. She had survived everything, the storm, the isolation, the pregnancy, the birth, all of it. She had built a life from nothing, carefully and completely, and her son was her reason for everything. And now, she was powerless. No campaign strategy, no hard work, no all-nighters could fix this. She could only wait. And worry. Quietly. Desperately. Alone. At night, she'd tiptoe into Luke's room and just sit there in the rocking chair, listening to his soft breaths. Some nights, he'd stir and reach out a hand, still half asleep. She'd hold it until he settled again. In those moments, she stopped being strong. She cried silently into the dark. For 30 days, she lived inside a quiet, suffocating fear, wearing calm like armor while inside, everything shook. She never once thought of calling Victor. Not because she didn't want to, but because her decision was made long ago. She would carry this weight alone, no matter what the results said. Chapter 16, A Gala Encounter. The night of the gala arrived like a sharp exhale Claire didn't know she'd been holding. She almost didn't go. Luke had been more tired than usual that week, and the fear inside her had calcified into something dense and silent. The 30-day wait for the lab results was just past the halfway point, but every tick of the clock made her feel like she was slipping closer to the edge of a cliff. She stared at the dress laid out on her bed, deep navy, soft satin, classic silhouette, one of the last untouched remnants of her time in the Maldives. It had lived in the back of her closet like a secret, a whisper from another life. She had nearly forgotten how it felt to wear something that made her feel like her, not just a mother, or a consultant, or a woman holding her world together by the seams. She dressed in silence. Did her makeup in the glow of the hallway mirror while Rosa, the nanny, kept Luke busy with books and puzzles in the living room. Claire checked on him 4 times before she left. Kissed his forehead twice. Packed snacks, numbers, medical contacts, emergency notes. And then, finally, she stepped into the waiting car. The gala was being held at a historic hotel in Midtown, a grand space restored with gilded staircases and chandeliers that glittered like champagne. Claire stepped inside and immediately felt the weight of the room shift. Everyone was dressed to impress, tailored suits, jewel-toned gowns, clinking glasses. Her firm's logo was projected subtly onto the ballroom walls, flickering like a heartbeat beneath the music. It was meant to be a celebration. A toast to growth. A night to network and impress clients. But for Claire, it was just an exercise in endurance. She smiled. She nodded. She shook hands with senior partners and project leads. Everyone kept saying she looked radiant. That she had bounced back beautifully. That she was a powerhouse. And yet, through every conversation, her mind floated back to Luke, to the faint bruises on his arms, the low-grade fever that came and went, the quiet dread she could never fully silence. Still, she stayed. She found herself standing near the back of the ballroom, nursing a glass of sparkling water, her heels aching, her mask of calm starting to slip, when something shifted. The air changed. She didn't hear him. She felt him. Her spine straightened instinctively. A prickle ran up her arms. And when she turned, scanning the crowd across the marble floor, there he was. Victor. He stood near the ballroom's far entrance, speaking to someone in a dark grey suit. But his posture was unmistakable, tall, sharp, still, and self-contained. Even in a room full of Manhattan's elite, Victor Ambrose looked like he owned the building. Her breath caught in her throat. Time didn't just slow. It stopped. He turned then, just slightly, his eyes sweeping the crowd. And he saw her. It wasn't a glance. It wasn't a polite recognition. It was a collision, a crash of memory and heat and history. Storm grey eyes met hers, and in a single second, 2 years of silence burned away. Claire stood frozen. She hadn't seen him since that day in the Maldives. She'd replayed the last kiss in her head 1,000 times. Wondered where he was. If he had thought of her. If he'd moved on. But seeing him again, like this, shattered every theory she'd built around the distance between them. Because the truth was written all over his face. He hadn't forgotten her. Not even close. He excused himself from the conversation slowly, eyes never leaving hers. And then, he crossed the room. Every step brought him closer to the part of her she had buried so deep she thought it might never rise again. The part that still remembered what it was to be held under stars, to be kissed like a secret, to be seen. When he stopped in front of her, everything fell silent. For a heartbeat, neither of them spoke. Then, "Claire," he said, low and smooth. Her name in his voice undid something in her. She tried to smile, but it came out shaky. "Victor." His eyes swept over her slowly. Not possessively. Not like a man claiming something lost, but like someone who had just found a missing piece and wasn't sure how to believe it was real. "You look," he paused. "Like the last 2 years didn't touch you." Her throat tightened. "They did." He nodded, his gaze steady. "Me too." They stood like that, two people suspended between what had been and what still lingered, while the room kept moving around them in a blur of sound and sparkle. Claire cleared her throat, trying to breathe normally again. "I didn't expect to see you here." "I wasn't planning to come," Victor said. "Until this morning." "Business?" "A new acquisition." "One of the companies your firm consults for." "Of course." Even fate had a sense of irony. She looked down at her glass. "It's been a long time." He didn't blink. Not long enough to forget. Her eyes shot up to his. The attraction, the heat, it wasn't just memory. It was alive. Stronger than it should have been. Electric and reckless. Claire's body remembered him before her mind could form excuses. Her skin warmed under his gaze. Her pulse betrayed her. Victor stepped closer, but not enough to crowd her. Just enough for her to feel the electricity radiating off him. "Are you seeing anyone?" he asked. The question stunned her. She shook her head. "No." "You?" "No," he said. Then added, softly, "I haven't wanted to." Claire's chest constricted. She looked up at him, caught between past and present, between what they had and what she had been running from for so long. And before she could stop herself, she whispered, "Me neither." Chapter 17, Testing the Waters. The first time Victor called her, it was less than 24 hours after the gala. Claire had just finished folding Luke's laundry, tiny socks, soft pajamas, a faded blue dinosaur shirt he refused to sleep without, when her phone lit up. Her breath caught in her throat when she saw his name flash across the screen. Her heart didn't race, exactly. It paused. Like it knew something was about to change. She let it ring twice before answering. "Hi," she said quietly. "I was hoping it wasn't all in my head," Victor replied, his voice low, calm, and unmistakably him. Claire sank into the couch, her knees pulled up to her chest. "What wasn't?" "That we still have unfinished business." She didn't respond for a moment. And then, truthfully, she said, "It didn't feel finished." There was a pause. Then his tone shifted slightly, warmer, softer. "Have dinner with me." "Victor." "No expectations," he said. "No pressure. Just dinner. I want to talk. See you again. Nothing more than that." Claire hesitated, staring down at the little pair of socks still in her hand. Nothing more than that. She wasn't sure she could do nothing more. Seeing Victor again, even at the gala, had stirred things inside her that she hadn't let surface in 2 years. But even as her head tried to build walls, her heart had already answered. "Okay," she whispered. Dinner. They met 2 nights later. A small, hidden French bistro tucked behind a bookstore in the West Village. Victor had chosen it deliberately, quiet, candlelit, private. Claire arrived 10 minutes early, irrationally nervous despite knowing this man better than she'd let herself admit. She wore a deep emerald blouse and black trousers, understated but elegant. No diamonds. No silk gowns. Just her. Victor arrived exactly on time. When she saw him walk through the door, everything that had been held tightly inside her for years stirred. He was in a dark coat, hair slightly windswept, his usual composed self, but his eyes lit up when they met hers. He pulled out her chair without a word and sat across from her. And just like that, it began. The conversation was easy at first. They talked about work, cities, books. Victor told her about a new tech acquisition in Lisbon, Claire about the consulting firm she'd taken partial ownership of last year. She kept the conversation light, guided it carefully, steered it away from the cracks beneath the surface. But Victor wasn't a man easily distracted. He watched her like he always had, not with hunger, but attention. The kind that made her feel as if every word she said mattered. That made silence between them feel rich, not awkward. They didn't touch. They didn't flirt. But the undercurrent was unmistakable. At one point, he said softly, "You seem different." Claire gave a faint smile. "It's been 2 years. No," he replied. "It's not time. It's something else." She looked down at her wine. He didn't push. Not then. Over the next few weeks, they began to see each other again, not constantly, but enough to reawaken something they had buried too long. Coffee on Sunday mornings. Walks through Central Park, talking about books, architecture, politics. Long dinners with quiet glances that lingered a second too long. They didn't cross any lines, yet. No kisses. No confessions. But it hovered between them, always, like a thread waiting to be pulled. And all the while, Claire kept the truth locked behind her ribs. She didn't speak of Luke. She told herself it was temporary, that she was protecting both of them. That Victor would walk away if he knew. That it was better to hold this delicate reconnection gently, without complicating it. But it wasn't just self-protection anymore. It was fear. Because with every passing moment, she felt herself falling again. And this time, she knew exactly how far there was to fall. Victor noticed. Of course he did. She dodged personal questions. Changed the subject when asked about her evenings. Always checked her phone when he wasn't looking, never stayed out too late. When he asked where she lived now, she gave him a vague answer, Brooklyn, without offering a street or a building. She was hiding something. He could feel it like a current beneath their every conversation. But he didn't press. Not yet. Instead, he watched. And waited. Because Victor Ambrose wasn't a man who demanded answers before the right moment. But he never missed when someone was holding back. And something told him, no, warned him, that when Claire finally told him what she was hiding, it would change everything. Chapter 18, Secrets on the Edge. Claire had always believed that secrets, once buried, stayed quiet. But now they pulsed beneath her skin like a second heartbeat. It had been almost a month since the gala. Almost a month since she'd looked across a ballroom and seen Victor for the first time in 2 years. And since then, everything had changed. The spark between them hadn't faded. It hadn't even dulled. It had reignited the moment their eyes met, effortless and immediate. With each quiet dinner, each long walk, and each lingering look, something precious, something dangerous, was rebuilding itself between them. And it was tearing Claire apart. Because every soft moment they shared was shadowed by the truth she hadn't told him. The truth about Luke. Their son. Victor had invited her to dinner again that night. She almost said no. Luke had been sleepy all day. He didn't have a fever, but he was pale and quiet, and Claire's nerves were already fraying under the weight of the still pending test results. She'd marked the days on the calendar, only a handful left before the hospital would call. But Rosa had insisted. Go, she said gently as Claire lingered at the door, torn between guilt and the pull of the man waiting across town. You need air. A little joy. He'll be fine for a few hours. And I'll call if anything changes, I swear. Claire hesitated, then kissed Luke's soft hair and whispered a promise in his ear. I'll be back before you wake up. The restaurant Victor chose this time was small, dimly lit, and tucked down a narrow cobblestone alley in Tribeca. The moment she stepped through the door and saw him waiting at the corner table, sleeves rolled up, glass of red wine untouched in front of him, her breath caught, the way it always did. Hey, he said softly, standing as she approached. She smiled, her coat wrapped tight around her frame, not from the cold, but from the things she was still holding in. Hey. He didn't lean in to kiss her cheek, and she didn't reach for his hand. But the air between them sparked all the same. They talked easily over dinner. About work. About cities they wanted to visit. About books neither of them had time to read. But Claire could feel the questions that hovered just beneath Victor's surface, unspoken but gathering weight. She was deflecting again. She knew it. He asked what she was doing over the weekend. She told him vaguely that she was keeping things low-key. He asked if she still traveled often. She said, not really these days. Each time, he nodded. Each time, he let it go. But his eyes. They were starting to look at her differently, not just with affection, but with curiosity. With suspicion. And that terrified her. On the cab ride home, she sat in silence, her fingers trembling in her lap. The city flickered past the window like a fever dream, too fast, too loud. Her chest ached with the weight of what she hadn't said. Tell him, a voice inside her whispered. Tell him about Luke. About the child who has his eyes. About the reason you walk around every day holding your breath. But she couldn't. Not yet. She still remembered what it felt like to leave him. The way his expression had shifted when she told him goodbye in the Maldives. The quiet, aching disappointment. The unspoken questions she'd never answered. If she told him now, after all this time, would he see it as a betrayal? Would he think she'd hidden Luke to punish him? To trap him? Or worse, would he want to take Luke away? That fear wrapped itself around her like a noose. No matter how many times she told herself Victor wasn't that kind of man, that he had been kind, generous, protective, she couldn't shake the fear that he wouldn't forgive her for keeping their son a secret. The stakes were too high. She wasn't protecting a memory anymore. She was protecting a child. That night, after she'd tiptoed into Luke's room to check on him, watched him sleep, his small chest rising and falling slowly, Claire sat at the edge of her bed and stared at her phone. Victor had texted her half an hour ago. Tonight was nice. Can I see you again this weekend? Her thumb hovered over the screen. Her heart thudded hard in her chest. She typed yes. I'd like that. Then paused. Then added, and quickly erased. But I need to tell you something. She stared at the blinking cursor. And then, for the 100th time, she hit send without the truth. Just yes. I'd like that. In the dark, Claire curled into herself and held her breath again. She knew it couldn't last. That the truth would come out, one way or another. But for now, she clung to the moments before the fall. Where there was still magic. And still time. Even if both were running out. Chapter 19, The Call. The restaurant buzzed with soft conversation, low jazz, and the occasional clink of glass against porcelain. Candles flickered on each table, casting golden halos onto white linens. It was the kind of place where time felt suspended, no urgency, no rush. Just good food, warm ambience, and quiet intimacy. Victor reached across the table and poured Claire another glass of wine. He'd taken her to a rooftop lounge tucked away in Soho, exclusive, elegant, with a skyline view that made Manhattan look like a painting. Claire had been smiling more tonight. Not just the polite kind she wore during client meetings. But real ones. Soft. Unburdened. The kind that didn't come easily anymore. She had taken time with her appearance, too, wearing a slate grey dress that hugged her waist and fell gently around her knees, her hair in loose waves over her shoulders. Her makeup was minimal, but her eyes still shone beneath the candlelight, holding that flicker of something Victor hadn't seen since the Maldives. You used to hate wine, he teased gently, watching her swirl her glass. She smirked. That was before motherhood turned me into a half-functional insomniac. A single glass is a small act of rebellion. Victor chuckled, and Claire's heart did that foolish little flip it always did when he laughed, like nothing in the world could possibly be wrong. Except something was. And even before her phone rang, Claire could feel it building, like pressure behind a dam that had cracked weeks ago. She hadn't told him. About Luke. About the truth. Tonight, she had almost said it. Over appetizers, she'd opened her mouth twice, only to be interrupted once by the waiter and once by Victor reaching for her hand with that impossible look in his eyes. Now, sitting there with him, warmed by wine and the night breeze, she knew it wasn't just fear anymore. It was guilt. A deep, festering guilt that gnawed at her with every passing day. And just as she drew breath to speak, her phone rang. She glanced down at her clutch, frowning. Rosa, Nanny, her heart stuttered. Victor noticed. Everything okay? Claire's hand shook slightly as she pulled out the phone. It's Rosa. She never calls during. She answered immediately. Rosa. The voice on the other end was screaming. Claire. Claire, he collapsed. Luke collapsed. I don't know what happened, he was just playing and then oh God, his eyes rolled back. I think he fainted, he's not responding, Claire, he's not responding. The restaurant dissolved around her. Claire stood so quickly her chair scraped backward, toppling onto the floor. Call 911. Now. I'm on my way. Victor was already rising, his expression turning stone cold in a second. What happened? Claire's eyes were wide, wild, her entire body trembling. "It's Luke," he collapsed. "I have to get home, he's not okay." She didn't finish the sentence. She was already grabbing her coat, shoving her phone back into her clutch with shaking hands. Victor caught up to her just outside the entrance. "My driver's downstairs," he said tightly. "We're not wasting time with a cab. Come on." She didn't argue. The ride uptown felt like a slow-motion nightmare. Claire sat in the back seat with her fists clenched so tightly her knuckles turned white. Victor sat beside her, staring straight ahead, jaw tight, hands on his knees. "What hospital?" he asked. "Ambulance is taking him to Presbyterian," Claire whispered. "They know him there. His doctor, he's had tests, they know." Victor didn't say anything at first. But then, slowly, calmly, he asked, "Claire, who is Luke?" She turned toward him, and for a single heartbeat, the whole world stopped moving. "He's my son," she whispered. His eyes met hers. "Claire," he said again, voice sharper now. "How old is he?" Her throat tightened. Her lips parted. And then, finally, she said the words she had buried for 2 years. "He's yours." Victor inhaled once, like the wind had been knocked from him. They stared at each other. And Claire knew, in that instant, there was no going back. The car screeched to a halt in front of the hospital entrance. Victor didn't wait for the valet. He leapt from the vehicle and rounded the car to open her door. Inside, the air buzzed with movement. The nurses had been pre-alerted. A pediatric code was in progress. Claire gave her name and Luke's as she reached the desk, but even before she finished, a nurse was ushering her down the corridor. "He's in trauma room 3. He's stable for now. The doctors are with him." Claire pushed through the door without hesitation. And froze. Luke was lying on a narrow hospital bed, pale as snow, with wires across his chest and a nasal cannula in place. His tiny hands looked too small against the white sheets. He was unconscious, but breathing. Her knees nearly gave out. Victor stepped in behind her, and everything changed. He saw the boy. He really saw him. The dark curls. The pale skin. The exact storm-gray eyes that now lay shut beneath long lashes. The resemblance was undeniable. Victor stared, his entire body rigid. That's my son," he whispered. Claire nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Yes." He didn't speak. Didn't shout. He just walked forward, slowly, until he was at Luke's side, and gently, tentatively, reached out. His hand hovered for a second above Luke's little one. Then he touched it. "I'm here," he said, barely audible. It was the first thing he ever said to his son.
Thanks for listening to Billionaire Romance Stories, where love meets luxury in the most unexpected places. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, subscribe, and drop a comment. We love hearing your favorite twists and wild theories. And don't forget to ring that bell, because in this world of yachts, secrets, and steamy romance, the next story is always one scandal away.